Mhm.
Welcome back to the Make a Baby podcast. I'm Carolina Sotomayor, your podcast host, and Ricky Womb Healer. Today, we are diving into a topic that I know that you're going to totally love. It's going to be about nervous system and somatic healing. And today, we have Tatiana. Tatiana, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited.
So, Tatiana, can you give us a little short bio? Like, where are you out in the world? What exactly do you do, and who do you serve?
Sure. So I am a first gen Latina. My dad is
Ah!
Colombian, my mom is Guatemalan, and I was born in the United States and I live in Rhode Island. And I am a trauma and somatic therapist as well as a holistic coach. And I specialize in helping women regulate and rewire their nervous systems through holistic living and somatic practices.
I love that so much. So first of all, I am first gen, or I like to say I'm first gen. My dad was Ecuadorian. He's passed. He's in the spiritual realm now, and my mom is Caucasian. So I love seeing another Latina in the healing space. We need more, and I feel like when you have Latinas in the healing space, there's just something about like someone being, even if you're like, I'm Ecuadorian and you are of Colombian and Guatemalan descent, there's something about being seen, and there's
Mhm.
something that you can relate to that you just get a lot easier than across, like if a person was not of those familiars of theirs. There's so just so many different norms about Hispanic culture. And then there's
Mhm.
like nuances within like the specific regions and the countries, like food and things like that. But like there's just a lot of shared um I want to say shared patterns
Yeah.
that across Latina culture that can be really positive but also very toxic, that a lot of Latina women are undoing and unconditioning themselves from. Like, we have to
Mhm.
do it all, or to be a good wife you have to cook, or to be Latina enough you have to speak good Spanish, or
Mhm.
like, so it's just really great to have you and just share this space with you today. I am so super excited to talk about all the things. So you talked about somatic healing, and also trauma. Let's dive in.
Mhm.
And I know this is going to be super basic, but I want you to define what trauma is.
Absolutely. So first, I just want to say thank you so much for just pointing that out because I do feel about just being in the space with another Latina because I do feel the same way. And I think that more Latinas need to be in this healing space. So I just want to acknowledge that
Totally.
piece. It means a lot to me that I am in this space with you
Oh my
and we can
goodness.
share
Thank
that we
you.
have that in common. So the question was, what is trauma?
Yes, because I feel like a lot of people are like, I don't have trauma. And I'm like, okay, so the way I define trauma is any pain that could potentially be hurting you and is still hurting you and is blocking you and is stuck in your tissues, that's keeping you triggered
Mhm.
and in some type of nervous system response, whether it's freeze, fawn, fight or flight. And
Exactly.
some people say, oh, I didn't see that as abuse, I didn't see that as trauma, I didn't see that as a traumatic event. But now that you say
Mhm.
it, like, I feel like a lot of people, or that was just my dad being my dad,
Mhm.
or that, that's just Tia Teresa, or, that's just something that happened
Mhm.
to me in 6th grade. I
Yeah,
didn't know that that was a trauma. So
mhm.
can you explain what trauma is in
Absolutely.
your world, or what the definition is from your training, whatever you prefer?
Absolutely. And I think to your point, so many people say, oh, well, I didn't experience trauma or I didn't experience abuse. It's because we're looking at trauma as an event. And trauma isn't an event. Trauma is not in the experience. Trauma is actually what happens in the body as a result of something that happened to us. So
Ooh,
trauma
that's
is
juicy.
the nervous system's response. So trauma is not in the event. So the way that I like to explain it is if two people were to experience the same exact traumatic event, one person can develop trauma and the other person doesn't develop trauma. And that's because
Mm,
everybody has different nervous systems and the trauma itself isn't the event itself isn't the trauma. It's the response that we have in our bodies.
that's the trigger.
Mhm.
Ooh, so you just educated me a lot. The way I was approaching healing was if we can go to the first time you experienced this, like the first time, like what was the event that caused the hurt, or if we can identify the relationship, then we can go to the root cause of the first
Mhm.
time it happened
Mhm.
and heal from that point forward.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, the
And
really
that's a
cool.
really great point that you think it's like what happens in your body and like it's not the event itself. Like, so like a breakup or a
Mhm,
divorce of your parents, it's not the actual divorce, it's what happens inside your body.
mhm, exactly,
Mm,
exactly. So, and
that's
the other
huge.
thing to remember is that our nervous systems don't use logic. So our nervous system can perceive a threat, even if we're not actually in danger. It can perceive a threat. And once the nervous system perceives a threat, it immediately goes into the state of activation, fight or flight. And so if the nervous system can't fight the threat, can't flee from the threat, it automatically falls into freeze and shut down. And if that energy in the body isn't completed, if we're not able to complete that survival response, then that energy gets stored in the body, and that's the trauma.
Wow. I've seen a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
I've experienced it myself. That
Mm-hmm.
totally makes sense. So there's like a whole process of
Yeah.
it. So it's not enough to say, I don't want this as it's happening and I release and let it go.
Nope.
You have to complete a process.
Absolutely. And we can't really control the nervous system. The nervous system will just react, it will just respond, it will go into our states of survival whenever it perceives a threat, and we have no control over that. The only thing that we can control is how we respond to our nervous system if we have the awareness that it's in this state.
I think you have to have capacity. You have to have healed to a certain point to have that awareness, to have that pause. And I always think that a lot of people like to have 20-step rituals, like their skincare routine or whatever. I wash
Hmm.
my face with like whatever soaps in the shower. But
Hmm.
like it's it's not if you're not taking care of basics where you're eating, drinking water, if like it's like it's no different than a little kid. If my 7-year-old is hungry, thirsty, tired, he has to go potty, like I can't expect him to be well behaved
Hmm.
or not like show me signs of distress
Yeah.
or be irritable because his basic needs have not been met.
Yes.
So like
1000%.
so yeah, okay, so I see all the time because I'm on nervous system TikTok. And I see all these hacks for controlling or regulating your nervous system. What do you think about that term regulating? And then what do you think of all these hacks?
Yes, great question. So I like to reframe that a little bit and say that these somatic tools and practices are there to support our nervous system.
Ooh, I like that
And when
better.
I think
It's
of,
more feminine to say support instead of regulate.
yeah, and
Ooh, that's a
also
very interesting take.
when I think about regulating, I think about this. When we experience trauma, our nervous system gets stuck in these states of fight or flight, and then it gets stuck in these states of freeze, and then it goes back into fight or flight, and it goes back into freeze. So it has no flexibility, it has no flow. So a nervous system that's dysregulated is going to get stuck in these survival states. A nervous system that's regulated has flexibility and flow. So when I show somatic practices and tools to quote unquote regulate the nervous system, really what I mean is to support our nervous system, because these tools are going to support our nervous system, but they're not going to rewire and regulate our nervous system for flexibility and flow, if that makes sense.
Okay. So what rewires and regulates our nervous system for flexibility and flow?
Yes, we have to complete the survival response that wasn't completed at the time of the original wound, at the time of the original
For every
experience.
event?
Not for every event. And I love that question because I am trained in somatic experiencing, which is a body-oriented approach to healing trauma and rewiring the nervous system. And so I am directly working with the nervous system. I am not working with experiences or events. I'm not working with memory. I'm only working with what the body is telling me with the activation in the nervous system. And I'm helping women complete the survival
This
responses
is like
that
3 stages above, like, talk therapy, like, it's almost like you're looking down at what's happening and you're, like, moving the pieces to be where they need to be.
totally, totally. I like
Like
to
bird's
tell
eye view
people
versus, like, ant's view.
totally.
I
I
like that.
I tell people that I'm usually the person that women come to once you're all talked out. Once you've tried all of the therapies, once you've done EMDR,
I
IFS,
fucking hate
all of the
EDMR.
therapies, and you're like, there's
That was
something
me.
still
That was
missing.
me. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, and
Fucking
then
hate EDMR. That
EMDR,
wrecked
yeah,
me. That wrecked me. I did that, so I did 6 sessions of EDMR, and every time I did it, I was wrecked for the rest of the day. I couldn't do anything.
yeah, exactly, exactly, and that's not supposed to happen. That tells me that you're doing too much for what your nervous system has capacity for. So in somatic experiencing,
Hmm.
there's always containment, and you are not leaving my therapy session dysregulated. You are not leaving worse than you came in. That is not going to happen because I'm tracking your nervous system. So based on your tone of voice, your body language, what you report back to me, sensations, motions, all of that, your thought process, all of that is telling me whether or not you're in a state of fight or flight, freeze, or you're in a parasympathetic state. And so I'm always tracking your nervous system and making sure that you're not going outside of your window of tolerance.
That would explain so much of my healing journey, and that's why I ended up graduating or I quit my therapist.
Yeah, and that's what happens so often,
Yeah.
right? I think so many people have bad experiences and they're like, "Well, you know what? This is just what it is. We're just going to have to stay in the state of activation, state of anxiety or whatever it is, state of dissociation for the rest of my life." And they don't go back to therapy. But I think that's why I am on this mission to spread more awareness about somatic healing and the nervous system because there are other ways of healing that don't require talking about your trauma and don't
Mm.
require remembering your trauma.
I think that yeah, that's a big thing with me is why I did like Reiki so much was I didn't have to talk it and relive it again. Like, I could just be like, "This I know this." I'm probably the most self-aware person I know. I could tell the Reiki healer, I was like, "This happened. I don't wanna talk about it. I feel it's here." I could tell her where it was in my tissues,
Yes.
and I would say, I want you to remove it for me." And I
Yeah.
call
So,
her my Reiki mother, and she's the one who helped me conceive my son.
yeah.
And she's the one and she was a trauma massage therapist who was also a Reiki master. So,
Hmm.
like, that was the reason why that was part of my infertility journey. It was like 2 people in 1 week. A psychic and the grief therapist told me to go get Reiki in the same week, and the reason why the therapist wanted to do is just like, "I want you to her massage the trauma out of your tissues because
Hmm.
it's not leaving you."
Yeah. You would absolutely love somatic experiencing
I'm
because
so excited.
Reiki and somatic experiencing go hand in hand. They're very, very similar. So, yeah,
I'm
we're both
super
working with
excited.
energy. Yeah.
Tell me more about so how does it actually work? So describe what somatic therapy healing is. Like what is the energy? Like what is the training like? I'm a curious cat.
Yeah. So, somatic experiencing is different from other forms of somatic work. So, for example, EMDR is a form of somatic healing, but it's
Oh,
very different than somatic experiencing. It looks completely different. So, in order to get trained as a somatic experiencing practitioner, it's a minimum of 3 years. So, it's
whoa.
beginning one, beginning two, beginning three, intermediate one, two, and three, and then advanced one and two. I'm on my fourth year, so I'm currently, right now it's April 2024. I am in my advanced year. So I just need one more training left, and we have to meet the requirements for personal sessions. So we have to have our own somatic experiencing practitioner and meet the requirement for that. But then we also have to do case consultations. So it's a very intense process. But it truly is life changing. And what somatic experiencing is we're really working with the activation in the nervous system. So we are changing somebody's physiology. We are rewiring the nervous system by completing those survival responses. And it's going to
Wow.
look different for every single person. But really, a typical session is really the client coming in. I'm immediately assessing where they are, fight, flight, or freeze, or
Mhm.
parasympathetic. They're feeling settled and connected in their bodies. And then I'm tracking their nervous systems. I'm saying, what are you noticing in your body? What are the physical sensations? What are the emotions? And are there any thoughts or colors that come up for you? They're just reporting back to me what they're noticing in their bodies. I know based on what they're telling me what state of activation they're in, and then I'm helping them complete the survival response.
So you decode based upon their feedback.
Yeah, basically.
Oh, so you like it's like a loop and you're closing the loop for them. So a
Exactly.
person can get out of fight or flight, and then what do they go into? What is that called?
So if they get out of fight or flight, depending on the person's nervous system, they might go into this parasympathetic state, which is when they're feeling settled, calm, safe, connected. But here's the key. We really want to help the nervous system pendulate, right? Because like I said earlier, the nervous system who that's traumatized is getting stuck in these survival states, and so it's not pendulating. It's not going from activation to parasympathetic, feeling calm and at ease, right? So think of it like this. When we go to work, we're activated because we are focused, we're doing whatever we need to do. And then we get home and we can rest and relax, right? And then our nervous system can come back down into a parasympathetic state of activation, right? A nervous system that's dysregulated or that has experienced trauma can't do that. It's stuck on all of the time. So in the session, what I really want to do is intentionally help the nervous system pendulate, go up and down, activation, settling in a really contained way. So we're doing like tiny, tiny doses. We're
It's almost like
titrating.
practice of them what they're supposed in the phase or state they're supposed to be, but that state gives them an ebb and flow because that's what real life is going to be like.
Yes, exactly, exactly.
Okay.
I love the way that you put it.
Because
Exactly.
they're I see a lot of women that learn masculine energy and they overcompensate and they have to grow up too fast. This results in PCOS and endo very much is like the most common thing that I see. So then they
Mhm.
get affirmed by society and people around them. Oh, you're such a good girl. Look what how much you did. Like, oh my gosh, you got. And then it just continues straight A's. Or look how good of a job you took care of your brother and your sister. Maybe they're an oldest child or like, "Oh my god, you did so much. Mom doesn't have to do anything," or like, they were mom or they were parent or if dad was absent, and then
Yeah,
they continue that into adulthood. So this is like their main way of living. So they don't have much practice in anything else or another way of being. Do you ever encounter that?
exactly. Absolutely, yeah, so then we start to look at the fawn response. I usually talk about fight, flight, and freeze because those are the physiological responses versus fawning, people pleasing is
Super
more
common.
of like it's not physiological, it's more of like a behavioral response, right?
Yeah.
It's an
No, yeah, it's
adaptive.
like an obvious symptom I see when
Yeah,
if their womb is closed.
yeah,
Like, yeah, because that means, like, if they're seeking approval, that means the external power is like, the giving away of the power is the overcompensation. It's the number one
exactly.
thing.
Yeah. And if they're seeking approval, they're really looking outside of themselves. And when somebody is looking outside of themselves, it's a good indicator that they're disembodied. They're not connected to their bodies. And when we're not connected to our bodies, our nervous system is in a state of activation, right? When we are connected to our bodies, we are typically in this state of parasympathetic activation.
Wow. How long can a person sit in the can you say it again? Can you say it again?
The parasympathetic nervous system. Yeah.
Parasympathetic nervous system. How long can a person sit in that state?
Good question. So, when we experience trauma, it's really hard to be in that parasympathetic state. So think about people who are always on the go, right? And then they slow down and they try to meditate.
I
They
can
can't
totally
do it.
relate.
It's really hard. And the reason for that is because it feels unsafe and risky to the nervous system
No, I
because
totally relate. Yeah.
yeah, your nervous system is so used to being in the state of activation. And so again, in our somatic experiencing sessions, we are growing that capacity to be in that parasympathetic state. So it's not just about growing the capacity to be with uncomfortable sensations and emotions, but it's growing the capacity to be with calmness and happiness and feeling proud of yourself and empowerment, all of that.
Um, do you so essentially I ask people, where do you source your joy from? And a lot of people have a hard time answering that question. So that's a really good answer is that they're probably disconnected.
Mhm.
They're disembodied,
Yeah,
and that's why they're in one of the responses
exactly.
in fight or flight, fawn, or freeze
Usually
if
when
they
somebody
can't answer that question or they don't even know what brings them joy at all.
Exactly. Usually, when somebody has a hard time identifying what feels good to them, and if they have low self esteem, low self confidence, they're usually in a
Worth
state of self worth. Yeah. Usually, they're in a state of freeze. So, freeze, just like fight or flight, is a spectrum, right? Freeze is where low self esteem lives, depression lives, burnout lives, dissociation lives. It's a spectrum.
This is super powerful. I know that so many women are gonna be like, "That's me."
Mhm.
Is it possible to move from freeze and paras I'm gonna get this word. It's a new word for me. It's a
It's a
long
new word.
word.
Parasympathetic, yeah. Pa
Parasympathetic.
Uh-huh.
What's the next word?
Sympathetic activation is fight or flight. Parasympathetic is calmness, safety.
So can a person move back and forth on like can a person move back and forth easily from these things or is it like is there like is there anything with the nervous system that's timed like a person can switch like in an hour between these things or like how like is there any like how quickly can a person switch from one to another?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it really depends on the capacity of the person's nervous system. But going back to your original question of can someone go from freeze to feeling calm and settled or into a parasympathetic state, typically what happens is when they're in freeze, they go into fight or flight. So they might feel a little bit more anxiety. Maybe they feel frustration, anger, annoyance. And then from fight or flight, they calm down to parasympathetic. So I don't know if you're familiar with polyvagal theory, but when we think
I've heard
about
of it.
polyvagal theory and we think about climbing the ladder, freeze and shutdown is at the very bottom of the ladder. And then fight or flight is in the middle. And then at the very top is what we call ventral vagal, which is truly the parasympathetic nervous system. And it's where you feel socially engaged, calm, safe, curious, things like that. So it really depends on the person's nervous system. If they have capacity, they can switch from a survival state in seconds, minutes, and it's really that's what we're trying to do in somatic experiencing. We're trying to create that flexibility and flow so that you're not getting stuck in those states of survival for days or hours, months.
Oh wow. Here's a question I'm super curious about. Is so Reiki can be spiritual and there's a lot of like spirituality around it. With somatic experiences, is there any spirituality to it, or is it all like just because this sounds very like science based and medical based? So what is the basis of it, and like is there any spirituality to it?
It is a very science based, but I think it really also depends on how you define spirituality and spiritual
True.
experiences, because a lot of people have very profound experiences in these sessions. And I think um, one could say it could be a spiritual experience, but it is mostly science based.
I like that. Can you tell me more? I was very curious about the certifications and the like you were talking about the different levels and degrees of it.
Yeah.
What is the governing body, or is there more than one that certifies? Is it a certification that you get? Like, what is the governing body over the modality that you do?
Yeah, so it's Somatic Experiencing International. So there's only one place that you can get trained in
Oh,
somatic
I like that.
experiencing.
It's very
And
simple
you go
then.
to the Somatic Experiencing International website, and it's international. So you can get trained in a lot of different countries, anywhere in the United States. Um, but you can only get trained through them.
Oh, I like that. With the Reiki, there is kind of like one governing body, but it doesn't regulate it doesn't it's provided a good standard, but everyone kind of does it all differently. So I love that there's like one place to go. I
Yeah.
like simple is best, simple
Hmm.
is easy to do.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit why you chose to do this? Because I
Yeah.
think people get into healing work. Like I've always said this, nobody gets into womb work, nobody gets into birth work, nobody gets into any type of these deep healing practices without having a profound life experience, have had someone that went through a life experience close to them that they weren't deeply impacted by. So, what led you here?
Absolutely. So I have been a therapist for 8 years, and I worked in community mental health for 4 years. I was a trauma therapist, and I'm also a complex trauma survivor. So I have lived in a state of survival for as long as I could remember. I'm no longer living in a state of survival thanks to somatic experiencing. So even as a therapist in community mental health, I was living in a state of activation every single day.
Mm,
And I constantly needed more work. I was always that therapist who needed to work with the highest risk clients because I needed that stimulation. I just needed a lot of work to keep me going. And that's where I found my worth. Then the pandemic came, 2020 came, we were all working from home, and things started to slow down, and I didn't know what to do with myself. I was unfulfilled, I was bored, but really what was truly happening in my nervous system was that my nervous system couldn't handle slowing down, right? We were just talking about that. My nervous system didn't have the capacity to rest or to be calm. And so slowing down felt really dangerous and risky. And so at that time, I told my supervisor, I'm really bored with what I'm doing. I'm unfulfilled and I need something more. And she said, well, maybe you just need to find a training. And I said, okay, I'll find a training. I didn't care what it was. I knew I wanted to do something mind body related because I was already kind of doing that with my clients. I'm also a certified meditation teacher, so I was already kind of in that field of I want to do something related to the body. So I started Googling trainings near me. I started Googling body oriented trainings, and somatic experiencing came up. I had no idea what somatic experiencing was. And I I said, okay, well, this sounds like a good training. I signed up for it, and it was life changing. I
was it
didn't
in person
know
or online?
it was online. So most of my trainings were online. I've only had one of my advanced trainings in person. Um, but they were all online because of COVID. And
Ah, okay.
I had no idea that this was going to change my life. Literally, when I say it changed my life, I was living in the state of activation all of the time. I was dissociating on the regular basis. I was super anxious all of the time. And after starting somatic experiencing, because part of the requirement is to do your personal sessions, I was able to shift out of the survival states and grow the capacity to just live my life like a normal human being.
Wow.
Yeah, and now I'm like,
The
everyone needs
pandemic gave
to
us all
know.
new gifts, didn't they?
Yes.
Didn't it?
Yeah.
I'm
Mhm.
so grateful for you to have leaned into that. It's funny, like, do you believe in, like, have you ever heard that term gob? I've heard God smacked and I've heard gob smacked. Do you believe that the universe might give you a timeout? Have you ever heard do you believe in that?
1000%. Yes.
So, I share a little bit with you. I used to be, they used to be like, it's Hurricane Gato. It's my nickname. So most Hispanic girls, if you're named Carolina, then your nickname's Gato, but by default. So they'd be like, it's Hurricane Carolina. And because I used to go, and it was never still. And my dad died. I got married super fast. Like we got engaged and married in 90 days. Talk about hurry. And then my horse died 1 year after my dad died. So my dad died, and then 3 days later, my grandpa died, his dad, my abuelo. And then 1 year to the week, my soul horse died. So there was a lot of grief. Fast forward, I do the grief therapy, and all of my identity, it was very similar to all my worth was
Okay.
in making money, making more money, being sustainable, now providing for my husband because I had this masculine mentality is like my dad used to say, I'm going to make a man out of you. Not until I fell off my second horse and I fell in a ditch. I was put on medical leave because my memory was not coming back. They would say like these numbers and then
Mhm.
say them backwards, and I couldn't say them backwards.
Mhm.
And then I had an issue with like my vision, like my perception. I would misstep the curb, like because I couldn't, the depth wasn't there.
Mhm.
Um, so I was put on medical leave.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, we were trying to have a baby. I couldn't be on TV. I couldn't watch TV. Couldn't be on my phone or my iPad.
Mhm.
Concussions are gnarly.
Mhm.
So I was put in a timeout. I
Mhm.
had to be literally this is why I laugh about it. It's the irony of like people tell you to slow down and you don't slow down, and the God will do it for you.
Mhm.
And I literally was put in a timeout. I was out for almost 2 months. I was out for
Mhm.
8 weeks.
Mhm.
And I got pregnant after one Reiki session. And it was because I was learning to sit with myself for the first time, to sit
Mhm.
with my emotions. I was learning to get bored. Being bored is actually really good, I think, for your
Mhm.
nervous system, because that means you're like starting to like be with yourself. And that's
Mhm.
for me is the first start of like trying to figure things out. That's the first phase of like oneness in getting to
Mhm.
know who you are. And then the next phase is what am I feeling? But first
Mhm.
have to feel bored to get to that inner part, right? That's like the
Mhm.
gateway. I'm like, great, that's amazing. Cause then
Yeah.
you're like really making progress if you're because that means you're listening to your mind and you got your mind quiet enough and
Mhm.
still enough to even feel that you're bored.
Yeah.
Um, I got Reiki after a psychic and the therapist told me I needed to get Reiki the next
Mhm.
week, and I was pregnant with Ollie because I had a timeout,
Mhm.
and because that's when I learned to slow down.
Mhm. Yeah.
But that was part of the start
Yeah.
of like, oh, okay, it has to be different. And I
Mhm.
didn't really learn it and master that lesson until I was postpartum. And
Mhm.
I had a reason to sit still.
Mhm.
And 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 then it just changed. But I think that I think sometimes we don't realize
Mhm.
signs if you
Yeah.
want to get a little woo, but like
Mhm.
also opportunities. Like you could say signs or opportunities, but like I think it's just awareness because if nobody knows they're in fight or flight
Yeah.
or freeze, you don't, and this is the way it's always been. You're like, well, I don't know any way that's different. And if everyone around you is the same way
Yeah.
and you get affirmed for this being like, I can't tell you how much more praise I used to get when I lived in masculinity and
Mhm.
in people pleasing. And I was, you know, I worked in a manufacturing plant. I used to do pharmaceutical manufacturing as
Mhm.
my
Mhm.
career. So like I was sometimes the only female in an all man department.
Yeah. Yeah, 1000%.
Yeah.
And
And
I
you
Go
get
ahead.
so much more praise than versus when
Yeah.
you're healed or you've done the healing, you've done the work, and you're like, no, thank you. And that's the end of your sentence. And you don't feel like you know your worth. You don't have to give them a full explanation. I'm sorry, I can't do this right now. My family
Mhm.
had emergency. Da, 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 da. No, no, thank you.
Mhm.
And stop.
Totally. Yeah, 1000%. And I think you touched on a few points, right? So, one, if especially if you're a complex trauma survivor,
What is that?
yeah, great question. So, complex trauma, it really starts off as developmental trauma, right? So, complex trauma is really someone who has experienced multiple experiences in their lives that have caused that trauma or has given that response in your body, right? So, for
Mhm.
example, someone who has had one car accident, right, and it's just one isolated event, that wouldn't be complex trauma because it's an isolated event. Someone who has experienced childhood neglect, emotional abuse, domestic violence, sexual abuse, sexual assault, right? The list can go on. If they've experienced multiple forms of trauma throughout their life, that is complex trauma. So, when someone has complex trauma, it's really hard to even identify that you're living in a state of activation or fight or flight because that is your normal. And as a Latina, I think a lot of Hispanic women can relate to this because I think so I can speak for myself. My dad is a workaholic, right? My dad is an immigrant from Colombia and he that's all he knows. Work is all he knows. And when I started working 3 jobs, my parents praised me for it because that is their normal. And now I'm in private practice. I work 3 days a week, and my parents are like, why aren't you working? So I think as when I was younger, I was getting a lot of that praise and it transitioned into being that employee who was always on time and working more than 10 hours a day and getting all my work done, right? And I was getting praised for it, but it's perfectionism, it's your nervous system living in this state of fight or flight, and it's going to burn out your body, and it did many times. So, yeah.
No. Then I am that. I am that so many times, not the label I wish I had. But I I don't know where you land on this, but one, congrats for getting to the place of creating the life that you deserve and are living and sitting in that space. I think once you are on the other side, like the space that you're in now, and if the people around you have not gotten to the place where you're at, you absolutely must create that internal validation and security for yourself where you have to be like, I'm doing good. And you have
Yeah.
to celebrate it. Like you have to bring your source of validation, security, reinforcements. Because if you don't, or find other people who are at the same place or a little bit ahead of you who can say, oh, girl, yes, you did, you are it. You are, this is that. This is, you made it. Like, I think that's super important to always have to create that within you first. But if you do have a friend that's a little bit ahead of you or can see the like this different paradigm that you are drastically living very differently, the people just will not understand. And I also recognize that some people will never understand, but that's
Mhm.
not their job. Like
Yeah.
what I'm creating is like so different,
Mhm.
and I'm going to sit in it and sit in it strongly because it is like It is your brilliance, it's your radiance that you are needed to provide to the world. I
Yeah,
drank that Kool-Aid.
totally, totally, yeah, and it's hard too, though, with our society and culture, right? I think, again, just kind of in, like, society, we're also just, like, in the United States, we also value very much working hard and hustle culture, right? And I think
I've had
it
to undo that so much.
yeah, and it's hard, right? Because you're trying to do something different. You're trying to break those generational cycles. You're trying to live your life very differently, but society, it's really hard when the rest of society isn't following, right?
100%. Oh man, I so much to unpack there. I feel that once you decide the dream that you want or the reality that you want, you have to sit with it for some time and then allow yourself to dream what is that person doing? That future version of yourself, what are they doing? And what are they feeling that's different than you right now? Because it is something that you are not doing or have become yet, that is that you don't that has the things that you don't have. I'll
Mhm.
use this for example. It's a very much when Ollie came out of me, he's my 7-year-old boy. um I was like, I want to be with him all the time. I want to be a
Mhm.
stay-at-home mom. We financially couldn't. I
Mhm.
was the breadwinner.
Mhm.
And 2021, I quit corporate and I
Mhm.
became a dual entrepreneur. I had two
Mhm.
businesses.
Mhm.
I've shut down my marketing agency. I'm just doing Reiki full time as of February.
Mhm.
And I've done both of them. Well, I've never really liked his after school program. He's in first grade. I told my husband, I was like, I really don't like this, but we'll go with it because this is the best we can find. But I would say his kindergarten year was a little bit rough for me. I would say age 6, maybe half of 5 was not my best parenting years. They weren't my favorite ages. Do I
Mhm.
love him with everything? I think that yes, I do. But not a lot of people talk about this. Like
Mhm.
this baby I prayed for, sure. I wasn't the best mom. Like
Mhm.
I tried,
Mhm.
but that age was really hard for me. He was but you know what was really great? My husband was really great in those ages.
Mhm.
My
Mhm.
point of this story is that now the after school program is actually not an option anymore for us because
Mhm.
there's some bullying going on and other things.
Mhm.
And I'm like, I also have more emotional regulation than I had a year ago. So
Mhm.
I told my husband, we went on a date recently. I totally believe in dating your partner. It's really
Mhm.
good for it makes me feel special, all of the good things. And I told him, I
Mhm.
was like, this might make you a little upset, but I kind of think it's time to pull him from the after school program. We're picking him up early every single day. I don't kind of see the point. He's in soccer now. And surprisingly, he said, I agree. I
Mhm.
think you should pull him for summer too. And I said, I think so. I think can change the business and I'll just be with him. And he goes, I think that you're in a place where that actually will be good for both of you. It
Mhm.
wasn't like that a year ago.
Mhm.
And I wanted to have had the capacity for him to be with me after school, but I didn't also want to parent him that much in the afternoon because
Uh-huh.
I didn't have that in me. The fact
Yeah.
is, I'd rather have worked on my business. So I
Mhm.
chose to put him in after school care.
Mhm.
But now I am embodying a higher frequency. I have more emotional capacity
Mhm.
to sit in a space where I can be supportive of his needs,
Mhm.
be a good parent, but
Yeah.
also support whatever he needs in the afternoon and change around things in my business. It wasn't like that a year ago.
Yeah.
And I think it's also, I was talking about this in my Instagram stories this morning. Sometimes things are a slow and steady burn. There's a lot of fancy language in the online space, quantum leaping, exponential growth. Some things are not meant to be fast.
Mhm.
And sometimes getting to like we can talk about nervous system regulation and all the different responses, but sometimes to make these changes within ourselves to get to the place and the opportunities we want, sometimes it takes a while.
Yes,
And that's
absolutely.
okay.
Yeah, it's 1000% okay. It's funny that you say that because I made a post on Instagram and it said, "Here's how to speed up your healing process." And the next slide was, "Go slower." That's
Mm.
how you speed up your healing process, by going slower. And I love how you said, now that you're embodied, you can be a better parent. You have more capacity. And I say that all of the time. The more that we regulate and heal our nervous systems, the better parent we'll be, the better wives we'll be, the better daughter, the better friend, partner. Healing and regulating your nervous system is the key. That is the foundation.
So, to wrap this up, this is our key takeaways. Your nervous system matters whether you're conceiving or not. There's more than one way to heal. Your nervous system support is what's going to help you get a more regulated nervous system so that you're not stuck in one of these responses. And one response has a spectrum, like you were saying. So go check out and how to work in the show notes with Tatiana. And before we close, Tatiana, if there is one thing that you could give, one piece of advice for anyone that's looking to work with their nervous system, and um, what is like one thing that they could implement or one piece of wisdom you could give them, what would that be?
I think it would go back to what we were just talking about of going slower, because I think that I come across so many women who want to heal so badly, and I completely understand that, but they want to heal so badly that they start to do somatic experiencing, EMDR, acupuncture, Reiki, massages, and they're doing that all at the same time. That is overwhelming to the nervous system. Yes, they're all healing modalities that are going to be supportive, but if you're doing all of those, you're actually not helping your nervous system at all. Stick to the basics, like we talked about earlier: food and sleep, getting your nutrients in, getting enough sleep, and then stick to one healing modality. Give it time, go slow. And once that's complete, then you can transition into something else.
I love that. And just because you tried it one time, if you like really don't like a practitioner, like you'll know, like if this is a full body no, but that's different than, oh, I didn't see any results. There might be things happening underneath the surface that are invisible and that you
Mhm.
just don't see. Like
Mhm.
my first Reiki session was out of the park. I felt I was floating. But like my second and third were just kind of like I fell asleep on the table. But I'm like, oh, okay. But I kept going. Like you're gonna see, I would say give something at least 3 tries or
Mhm.
3 months before you like this is for me or not. But if
Mhm.
you have a full body no, then listen to that. And I also it's like this might be a bad metaphor, but it's like mixing your liquors. Like
Yeah, totally.
it's like you want to I 100% agree. Like stick to one modality and go from there. If you obviously don't like needles, then don't get acupuncture.
Mhm.
If you don't like the taste of dirt, then don't do herbs. Like, like nobody likes the
Yeah.
taste of dirt. But I need to tell you, the tinctures are gross. Like I have used them and still do, but like yeah. So stick to one and give it a try. Now,
Mhm.
if you are seeing a talk therapist, that I think is like make sure you're talking about that with whatever modality practitioner you are doing.
Mhm.
Sometimes that is a good fit. Like if you have a good therapist and you're doing Reiki, I like that combo. Um
Absolutely. I would agree with that. I would agree. There are a lot of clients that I see who have their primary talk therapist, and then they
mhm,
come see me once a month for somatic experiencing. So
right.
I do think that if you have talk therapy, but if you're doing any other body oriented modality, I would say
No, I
no
don't
to
like
that.
that.
Yeah.
Cuz I think it's also like you don't know, like, you just don't know, like, there's so much technicalities behind and intricacies behind every modality with body work that
Mhm.
you don't know if it could be conflicting. And
Exactly.
there's like not every lineage of Reiki, like if I were to get a different lineage attuned to me, is complementary to what I've already received.
Yeah.
Or yeah. So can you tell everyone where they can connect with you, how they can book with you, how can they connect with you on the World Wide Web and socials?
Absolutely. So you can connect with me on Instagram. I'm tatiana.holistic.coach. And in my bio, there's a link to book your 90-minute somatic experiencing session if you want to work with me. And if you want more than 90 minutes of somatic experiencing, we can just chat on on what your other options are. So you can just send me a DM. But connect with me on Instagram. I love making new friends and just chatting and talking about nervous system healing. So if you have any questions or if you want to just give me your thoughts and reflections on what your journey is, I'm open to that too.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, my friends, we would appreciate your support of the podcast while you have your app open. Please give us a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts. And don't forget to follow us also on Spotify. Go ahead and go to the show notes and get our new latest freebie. It is called What is Fertility Reiki? It is a 6-part series we just released here on the podcast, along with an invitation for 3 days inside the Make a Baby membership and also a fertile womb activation. We are so grateful for your presence every single week. And until next time, my friends, let the Reiki flow. Frustrated being told you are fine by your doctor, exhausted from negative pregnancy tests every month, wanting a deeper connection on your fertility journey with your spirit baby? The Make a Baby membership is exactly what you need. Using Reiki will help you connect to your spirit baby, heal the trapped emotions blocking fertility, and support you in our life-changing community. With over 90 Reiki babies, we invite you to try the Make a Baby membership for free. Check it out in the show notes. Let's get you pregnant.